Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 8 team selection. Now we're going to actually look at Game Week 7, review that very quickly because I'm sure a lot of people have probably forgotten what my team structure is like before the international break and how it looks right now, set up and how it's going to deal with the fixtures up until Game Week 12. On top of that, this is a good time to sort of recap how I feel about my team and the moves that I made in Game Week 7 specifically, where I took a very, very early hit, probably one of the first times I've done it in recent seasons, to sort of restructure my squad, and we'll talk about that and how Game Week 7 went. Before we jump into my Game Week 7 review though, I'd love to shout out Fantasy Football Hub. They still have a fantastic deal up until the end of December. It's a 30% off offer for anyone who wants to join with no joining fees. As far as Fantasy Football Hub, it's a fantastic tool that does help you increase your rank as an FPL manager. It can suggest transfers for you. It can suggest wildcards for you. It can also even sort of tell you what moves to make based on the chip strategy that you have. For example, over the next 2 game weeks, some people might be considering a triple captaincy over Haaland. I do think when you look at some of the expected points in the future, it's not going to be as good as it's going to be over the next 2 games. So definitely that Southampton home game is the game that I would look at as a triple captaincy opportunity. I was someone who triple captained Haaland for his hat trick a couple of weeks back, and ultimately, we've seen that he's been very, very good versus weaker teams. This is the opportunity to consider moves like that. But let's just quickly jump into Game Week 7. As far as my team, we had 49 points because we did take a hit. 53 minus 4 leading to 49. 1.9 million in the world. So a very, very slow start for me this season. But I'm still very much comfortable with the team that I have. And that for me is more important than the rank right now. When I look at my team, yes, of course, I took a hit. Did I come off much worse? Yes, I was probably 5 points down, because if I even rolled last week or went into Bowen, which I won't talk about, I mean, Bowen was one of the moves that I did suggest, but I was sort of unsure what Bowen would look like in my team in a few weeks' time and whether I would need more free transfers to get him out of my team if I wanted to take him out. So I chose to almost pull the trigger on a Palmer move that I felt like I was closed away from in the future. Now, I did previously have Trent, but because I had Gabriel, Lewis, and Guardiola, I felt like these were defenders that I'm very comfortable owning for the foreseeable future, and I didn't necessarily need Trent in my structure. And there was a great opportunity to simply push Bruno out of my team. And because I didn't have access to Foden and Son was injured, I just thought that structurally for the long term, going into Palmer made sense, even though Nottingham Forest have looked like a good team. But it was a Game Week 7 game where they were at least at home from the Chelsea perspective. And with the chances with the red card, I think I felt pretty good about owning Cole Palmer. Certainly better than, I guess, when I owned Bruno and things weren't going my way. So yeah, happy with the team going forwards. As far as defense, it's nice to see that Lewis is consistently playing a lot of minutes, but I'm sure a lot of people can easily point out that Man City have looked markedly worse on defense. I do want to state for the point that from a data perspective, of course, we expect Man City to still be a top defense. So far this season on underlying stats, they're still within the top 4 or 5 teams, and it's not necessarily the case that Man City have become a laughingstock of defense. But that Fulham game was clearly abysmal. It was probably the worst defense that we've seen from Man City at home for a long, long time, and I don't think they've been so comprehensively outscored when it comes to the chances that they gave away their team. So one of the bigger XG gulfs that I've seen at the Etihad recently, and that wasn't an impressive performance. But I do think that games like the next 2 fixtures are a chance for Man City to step up in the defense. And I do own 2 defenders happily still, because Lewis and Guardiola, in my opinion, are also players within the Man City defense who can provide you some sort of attacking dividends. We've seen Lewis get into the pockets. His assist to Doku was a bit bogus in the sense that, I mean, he didn't do much there, but we've seen previous games where Lewis has had great opportunities in the box and has had abilities to set people up. Guardiola obviously scoring a goal recently too, one that I benched. But Gabriel also just a very, very consistent goal threat. So I'm happy with the team as it stands. Clearly, maybe a flaw is lack of Liverpool defense, but over the next few fixtures, I'm happy to take that punt. And that's part of that, knowing that I wanted Palmer over Trent within the medium term. So I did make that move for Palmer. And Mbeumo continues to look good. Saka looked incredible. There was a chance, as I mentioned, for managers who wanted to take that sort of free risk to go for Saka. I have to say, congratulations to all the managers who went for that captaincy. It was very bold, but it was also one of those best chances where you can go against a Haaland captaincy, even though Haaland was at home, because another top quality player had an incredible fixture. And I didn't take that chance, so I do feel a little bit bad about that, but more so in the sense that I didn't take the opportunity to go against the field, and less so about the outcomes. The reality is people who had that risk-taking awareness benefit from it, so congratulations to them. As far as Rodgers, he still continues to play really good minutes, But it's very clear that Aston Villa are not, an all out attack sort of team. They've shown to be quite resilient this season. I think the defense has actually looks like it's improved, but there are tougher fixtures in the distance for Aston Villa. So I think that whilst Rodgers is someone that I'm very happily owning, he's not someone that I necessarily need to see as someone who plays my week every single match going forwards. We have tough fixtures in the distance. The next 3 out of 4 fixtures, in my opinion, are really poor, like Fulham, Bournemouth at home, Spurs away, Liverpool away. The only good fixture there is Bournemouth at home for me. So that's how I feel about Rodgers, but he's a very good, I would say, long-term hold that I'm happy with. As far as the front line, Calvert-Lewin continues to be very, very poor. It's clear that Wood and Jimenez, I think, have been much more interesting. Even Liam Delap, arguably, who we haven't seen necessarily who's on penalties for Ipswich, but I have to imagine it's him. And those are players that I'm interested in, but I don't think that I'm going to switch off of Calvert-Lewin, at least up until the run of clean games ends and he plays his Ipswich and Southampton fixtures. After that, I might reconsider, but for now, I'm going to give him those chances and we'll see what happens. Solanke is someone that I'm also very happily owning. Depending on, let's say, the availability of Son, I think he also gets bolstered sometimes. Yes, the overall team probably gets worse when Werner plays over Son, and we've seen that recently with Werner playing really poorly. But at the same time, you get pen share. That's a bit of a knock-on impact that's positive for Solanke when Son is, let's say, off the field. As far as Haaland, he's blanked 2 fixtures in a row, and it's just a classic FPL thing where a lot of our expectations of players change so rapidly game week to game week. A few game weeks ago, he had 2 hat-tricks in a row. Now he's blanked 2 game weeks in a row, and the narrative has changed, but I think the fixtures are still there. There's still scope for amazing Haaland returns over the next 2 game weeks, so I'm happy that I own Haaland, and that's that. As far as my bench for this week in Game Week 7, Davis, Dibbling, Dunk, these are all decent players in the sense that if Van Heck comes back, I can rely on Dunk for fixtures like Game Week 9 versus Wolves at home. For Dibbling, I've got an exciting fixture coming up for him. He also seems to be, honestly, a very, very impressive talent. I really enjoyed his performance versus Arsenal at the Emirates. He looked really, really good. Was able to take on multiple defenders, and obviously hoping versus a much weaker defense in Leicester that he can do well at home next game week. As far as Davis, he's actually someone that I was only happy to move Trent into because I felt like, okay, I could have gone to someone like Vandenberg potentially, but the appeal to Davis really was for me the ability to rotate over some of the fixtures coming ahead. And he kind of is someone like an Aït-Nouri, even though he's not returned, he's not scored goals, for example, like Aït-Nouri, but he continuously does get into consistently good attacking positions. And I do think that it will pay off over the good run of games that Ipswich generally has. So I'm happy to have Davis as another rotation piece. And I do like, generally speaking, a more robust revolving team that can rotate. Obviously, it's hurt me this season so far. I've already benched 2 9-pointers, I believe, from defenders, but it's something that I've benefited from in the past, and I'm not going to get too hurt over some of the outcomes being brutal this season. So quickly jumping into my Game Week 8 team selection here, I'd like to start off with defense. And before we jump into defense, clearly just look at some of the market data that we actually have from Rob TFPL. He's been super kind. As usual, he's provided us with the sort of clean sheet odds from spread betting markets. You can have a look at Rob TFPL's content at Rob TFPL on X or Twitter. And simply put, this week, this is a good game week on paper for Man City once again. They lead the clean sheet odds by a pretty large margin, and then it's Arsenal as well. Liverpool, not so high this week because they are facing what have been a very strong attack, at least from the Chelsea side. And then actually across the board, I think the clean sheet odds aren't very, very good for most teams outside of maybe, let's say, Nottingham Forest, who's also got more than 30% clean sheet odds. It's very clear that Nottingham Forest have become an extremely impressive defensive team, which is something that we've sort of gleaned over from the data insights of the season. And they've continued that over the early parts of the season heading towards Game Week 7. So it's nice that we have more of a sample size on Nottingham Forest and can be much more confident on their defense. At the same time, United arguably have a decent fixture here, but this is also a good opportunity for a lot of those more attacking defenders that you usually wouldn't play when there's a great Arsenal fixture or a great Spurs fixture. Even the Spurs fixture is good here, 31%. And then these sorts of players are very interesting. I myself with my team, though, when it comes back to the context there, will just be playing my Arsenal and City defenders. They're quite attacking as well, so I do like my chances. Lewis was in training, Guardiola was in training, whereas some of the other Man City players have been absent from training. From the Arsenal front, we have a lot of, I guess, inconclusive news on who's ready and who's to play, but I think Gabriel is definitely going to be fit for this game, so no concerns there. He will definitely play for me this weekend. And Flecken, will be someone that I'll be fielding, I suppose, reluctantly now, since he's not really done much so far lately, whilst players like Pickford have been dropping 15-point, I guess, returns, or even 12-point returns. Can't really quite remember what Pickford did versus Newcastle, but that's the sort of slate of the season where, of course, goalkeeper returns can come, and they can, of course, with a penalty save, become really lucrative, but it's very hard to sort of predict those situations. I feel like, for example, watching the Chelsea versus Bournemouth game where Sanchez did the same thing, his clean sheet was very much undeserved. Arguably, the Pickford clean sheet was a little bit more deserved because he didn't cause the penalty like Sanchez did. But yeah, ultimately, hopefully Flecken will turn good, and we know that he's someone who still makes a high propensity of saves. But we have also seen, unfortunately, a bit of a downtrend for Brentford's expected goals conceded compared to, let's say, what the team strength models predicted at the start of the season. So there has been a bit of a regression on their defense, whilst the Premier League has actually generally seen a reduction in goals and average goals per game. So not a great sign as a Flecken owner, but I'm still confident that hopefully he can do some returns in the future. And ultimately, goalkeepers are also a position at FPL where I don't think you need to fret too much about it. It's very hard to predict the next goalkeeper return. It's better to deal with other problems in your team, save free transfers for more powerful moves. I'm generally a manager who probably likes to have a 4.5 goalkeeper and call it at the end of the day. So I'll do that with Flecken. This week, we clearly will play, as I said, Gabriel, Lewis, and Guardiola. And moving into the midfield, it's not a great game for Palmer and not a great game necessarily for Mbumo, arguably. I mean, United have been poor, but if anything, they've probably been okay on defense. That performance versus Aston Villa was actually really solid. That was Aston Villa away from home as well for Man United. So actually really good in terms of keeping the amount of chances from Aston Villa down. Obviously, Man United have been a pretty blunt edge on offense, so I guess that's a bit of a positive for Mbumo there for the clean sheet point. But once again, hoping that Man United don't play very well, which has been, unfortunately, the tail of the tape, I suppose, this season. On underlying stats, they're almost like a mid-table defense, so I think not a great game for Mbumo, but once again, he's one of the best assets in the game, particularly considering that the Brentford fixture run is pretty much quite extended over this period. And I would say there's great fixtures really for Brentford up until at least game week 14, where they clearly will have a tougher run of games. But for now, Mbumo's fantastic. Saka is an interesting one where, yes, of course, he's been absolutely brilliant over the last two matches. Some people will mention just the high amount of chances he actually built up within the Leicester game, despite not getting any returns there. And then, of course, it all came to fruition really in that Southampton game in the second half. What I would say about Saka, of course, is he has been super impressive so far, but it's not like his underlying stats have been absolutely miraculous or that his sort of production is something that we've not expected to see. I think at the start of the season, when looking at some of the betting market trends and sort of team strength sort of models, looking at, let's say, projections for player data, Saka was someone who actually was expected to do really, really well and to compete with the likes of Palmer and Salah. And so I think returns like that sort of remind people of how good he is. But this is also an opportunity to consider moving off of Saka just because the fixture run for Arsenal is tough. I'll just read off the fixtures from Game Week 8 onwards. It's Bournemouth away, it's Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Chelsea away, and Nottingham Forest at home. So that general fixture run for Arsenal is not great for the next 5 fixtures. And I do think that this is an opportunity for a lot of managers, if Son is available, if you want to consider Foden, because we don't seem to see KDB in training, to maybe pivot into those sorts of players for 5 game weeks or 4 game weeks, and then revisit bringing Saka back into the team. Sometimes it's nice to sort of cash out the bank with a huge haul, and I think this is an opportunity to do so for the managers who are happy doing that. At the same time, you can make the argument that Saka has been an absolute beacon of consistency this season. I think that there's been one blank so far, and he's done well in some of the tougher games, although, of course, blanking in the Leicester fixture. So that's something to be said about Saka. The set pieces, which of course he's a key part of on one side, is very clearly there, regardless of the game situation. But something to consider is whether we move out of Saka, and I'll talk about my potential transfer later on in the video. I will definitely be playing Dibbling this weekend, though. I don't know why, but the FPL app says that he has a knock, or that he's got 75% chance to play. As far as I could see from all these sort of scouting that I've done over the internet, I could not see anything regarding Tyler Dibbling and his lack of availability or even, any potential knock that he's had. As far as I'm concerned, he's perfectly fine, and I really do intend on playing Tyler Dibbling versus Leicester at home. So, I mean, Leicester this season have turned out, as we expected, to be one of the teams to target. Absolutely. They got some great results so far, though. like, for example, that win versus Bournemouth, but ultimately they've still given a lot of chances away. So Leicester currently sit in the bottom three when it comes to expected goals conceded. They're very close to Southampton, who are sort of fourth worst. Wolves after that, Leicester after that, and Ipswich, very definitively at the bottom of the league when it comes to expected goals conceded. So still, at the end of the day, when a team like Southampton faces off versus Leicester, I'd imagine this is the best opportunity for someone like Tyler Dibling to do well. I've been impressed by him so far. I'd love to play him in this fixture, and that was sort of the plan. I talked about that sort of Dibling-Rodgers rotation, and ultimately, as I said, Aston Villa have some tough fixtures. But when you look at Dibling's games in the short term, he actually has a really poor fixture in Game Week 9, whereas Rodgers, his one good game versus Bournemouth at home is on Game Week 9, and I could very likely see myself playing Tyler Dibling on Game Weeks 10 and 11, as long as his minutes are good going forwards and he, let's say, continues to impress. 90 minutes versus Arsenal was really, really nice as a positive sign when it comes to looking at his minutes. A couple of people asked me a few weeks ago whether I was confident in his minutes, and I felt like I was. But we know that Southampton have actually exercised a lot of tactical changes over the course of the last few weeks. We've seen a lot of different selections, but they've also had, I think, some injuries in the previous match too, which means hopefully more minutes for Dibling anyways, and that his minutes are secure even when he can, for example, play 90 minutes versus a really, really tough opponent like Arsenal. So ultimately, as I said, interested in having Dibling for this game. In the forward line, I am playing Calvert-Lewin. Part of the reason why I'm actually going for Calvert-Lewin is because I do have Leif Davis in my team, and this is still a good opportunity to play Leif Davis. I have considered maybe, will there be a world where I bench anyone in my team for Leif Davis? Arguably, that player could be Calvert-Lewin, or maybe one of the defenders in my team. But the reason why I want to play Calvert-Lewin is simply because this is a great fixture. I've already mentioned that Ipswich are one of the teams to target. They are bottom of the table for expected goals conceded. It is an away fixture, so it makes that a little bit worse on paper. But I have to imagine that someone like Calvert-Lewin, who's been pretty poor so far when it comes to output, but has gotten all the minutes that we could possibly want and some of the chances that we could possibly want, and hasn't scored since that Bournemouth game, could actually do well, or rather, so that Aston Villa game could actually do well here in a match versus Ipswich, which is probably one of the better games that they've had since that Leicester match. So I'll take my chances here with DCL. It's sort of a bet against one or the other. I'd like to take the Calvert-Lewin bet in this situation, and Leif Davis will reluctantly be on my bench. Rodgers, second bench after that, and then Dunk will be at the absolute back of the bench, but he will be called upon to play in Game Week 9 when he's got Wolves at home, and hopefully Van Heck is also fully fit for that, because I think the timeline for Van Heck seems to have actually been pushed forward. So when I look at my bench this week, I'm pretty happy with Dunk coming back into the team for Game Week 9, where I could conceivably bench, let's say, Gabriel versus Liverpool, which I don't really want to do that, but I think there's a good opportunity for upside there with Dunk, hopefully. And that's the plan. So that's going to be my team for this game week. Captaincy and vice captaincy is quite simple. Unfortunately, I don't think that I have a good deputy vice captain this week. So ultimately, the vice captain does go to Saka, and the captaincy clearly goes on to Haaland. Rob T has some great data when it comes to sort of projected goal scorers for the game week. Keep in mind, of course, that this doesn't really show the projected goals necessarily or projected assists necessarily of some of the players who we expect to do well for this game week. But I think this game week is one where there's a pretty big gulf between Haaland and the rest of the field, simply because it's Wolves away, and it's not like any of his peers when it comes to sort of those premium players or even sub-premium players have a good game, unless you're talking about someone like Foden as well, who arguably shares the same great fixture that Haaland does. So a very easy Haaland captaincy there. I might actually consider even maybe vice captaining Solanke. I don't think it's a huge impact, but I'm also sort of holding on to that Saka vice captaincy simply because I think there could be an easy opportunity to pivot into Heung-min Son. So my potential transfer for this game week, and this is absolutely if Ange makes in sort of no uncertain terms that someone like Son is ready to start this weekend, that since we know that he's been training since, let's say, today, which is Thursday, 17th of October, if he's ready to train and has, let's say, had a great training session today and probably maybe even some of the previous days before we actually sort of got some Spurs training photos, that if he's ready to start and will start for the weekend, which hopefully someone like Ange will sort of give us that information, because he's always been extremely forthright as a manager, which I love, compared to, let's say, Arteta, the absolute beta here. But hopefully I could actually make a move like Saka to Son. I don't think it's necessary to make that move, but I do see it as an opportunity to capture on the upside. So I've already mentioned the Arsenal fixtures previously, but the Spurs fixtures are effectively West Ham at home, Crystal Palace away, Aston Villa at home, Ipswich at home. For those four fixtures, I can easily see myself just going from Saka to Son, holding on to Son for 4 game weeks, and then moving back into Saka on game week 12, when Saka plays Nottingham Forest at home, which is obviously still a much better fixture, as good as Nottingham Forest are, than let's say Son versus Man City away, even though we know that Son is a big game player. So that's sort of what I'm planning to do if I really get the absolute all clear, Fran. If he doesn't give it that all clear, then I think the opportunity to pivot from Saka to Son is much more murkier, and I wouldn't make that move because this is still a good fixture for Saka before the fixtures get a little bit worse, like Liverpool, Newcastle, Chelsea, particularly since those last two games are away fixtures. And then I don't think there's so much of an advantage, I suppose, from making the transfer in subsequent game week. So this would be the game week where I pull the trigger on potentially moving Saka out of my team. But as I said, it will only happen if Ange gives us the absolute all clear that Son will start. If I think that Son, for example, is someone who's going to be eased into the game, maybe a substitute, then I'm not going to take that risk because there's absolutely no reason to take away Saka from a great fixture on this game week itself in game week 8. So that's going to be my team selection. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care and goodbye.